So, Deltarune Chapter 2, yeah, it happened, and it was incredible! Okay, let me back up a bit. So, when Undertale came out, I was not sure what to think about it, but I was recently able to play through the game as a whole for myself, and boy, what an incredible game that was. I may or may not have gotten spoiled on a few things, namely something involving a certain yellow flower, you stupid! But you know how it is. It's a good game. Deltarune Chapter 1, on the other hand, was a different case in which I had no idea what it was about or anything, so up until it released on Switch, I had no reason to really want to play it, but that encouraged me enough to give it a shot, and I loved it. It has this kind of Mario and Luigi RPG vibe to it that I really dug. The addition of multiple teammates did that game wonders over Undertale, and while I did enjoy that game, I'm simply saying Deltarune adding in more characters really gives it a more lively feel, I guess. They all bounce off of each other really well too, cracking some jokes here and there. It's all good fun. The music is especially good too, easily one of my favorite soundtracks from any game. It's like Toby Fox, you know, he was great in Undertale, but he just scales it up by like 2 times in Deltarune, and it's just freaking insane. You really do not want to know how long I have spent listening to just Rude Buster, and that's not even the entire OST. Oh, and I liked the combat too, that was good. Suffice to say, revisiting it, I did find it to be a bit more safe than I remembered. Not bad, far from it honestly, as I recently replayed it and it still had the exact same charm as before, but compared to Chapter 2, I don't know. It's almost certainly intentional, but I feel like it works in the game's favor by ending on a note where you wonder what else can be done with the concept. And speaking of which, what did we have to look forward to after Chapter 1? The future for Deltarune seemed unclear and like it was going to be quite a while before we got any more major news for it, and yeah, it's been nearly 3 years since Chapter 1 and I have been slowly deteriorating inside waiting for Chapter 2 to come out. Like, come on dude, release it! Okay, so I'm legally obligated to tell you that this was a joke because I really want Toby Fox to take as much time as possible for chapters 3 through 5 or whatever else he's gonna be working on for Deltarune, because I want it to be as good as Chapter 2 was, so don't get mad at me in the comments, shut up. In September, an Undertale anniversary stream happened, and at the end of it, Chapter 2 was announced to be finished and coming out in 3 days! Finally, Deltarune time! Man, I cannot begin to describe how excited I was for this, and I am sure you don't care. I was cautiously optimistic though, since as I said, Chapter 1's ending had me wondering what else could be done with the game, so does Chapter 2 improve upon this? Dude, okay, what do you think I'm going to say? You can read the video's title, can you not? So today, let's take a dive back into Deltarune and see exactly why Chapter 2 is so dang good. First and foremost, I want to get this out of the way. I do not like my initial Deltarune video. Do not watch it. Seriously, it's so bad. So to save you the agony of watching that, let's do a quick recap of Chapter 1's plot just so we're all up to speed. So basically you got this edgy and brooding teen, Chris, and their reluctant partner, Susie, who in a bizarre series of events discover that their school's supply closet hides another world, the Dark World. Chris and Susie later learn from Wyrlwind, the Prince of the Dark World, that a Dark World gets its form from a dark fountain, which casts a shadow creating the Dark World, and to, for lack of a better term, destroy that shadow, or in other words, the Dark World, 3 heroes from the Great Prophecy must seal its fountain. This is important because sealing the Dark World's fountain is Chris and Susie's only method of returning to the world of light where they came from, so a bunch of junk goes down, Susie does her thing for a while because she's a stubborn idiot, Lancer does a thing, everyone dies! Okay, not really. In the end, Chris and Susie seal the fountain, transporting the pair back to the school, and yeah, that's the basic gist of it, with several things left out because I can't be bothered to explain the context, so I'll probably do it later if it's relevant, unless I forget to. Anyway, that said, Chapter 2 starts with Chris heading to school, then meeting with Susie to see whether or not what just happened in Chapter 1 was actually real, and after jumping back into the closet, we get to see Wyrlwind again in Castletown and hear an interesting detail revealed which will likely be important for the future. Lancer's castle and everything around it, including Lancer and his people, kinda disappeared after Chris sealed the fountain off, so we head back into the school, gather up a bunch of garbage in the unused classroom, bring it back into Castletown, and everyone's back. Finally, the man of the hour returns! I'll touch more on the implications of this detail later in the video, because right now it'd be a bit confusing. At this point, I was really beginning to wonder if this chapter was going to confirm my fears, because there's not a whole lot to do here in Castletown. Like, you can talk to a number of familiar faces from the previous chapter, visit all the new buildings, like there's this party dojo which has challenges similar to what you'd see in the Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story challenge node, except not really, because it's more of just a practice dojo. But I think there's a potential for a boss rush mode in the party dojo or something. I don't know, at the same time, it might make the bosses feel a whole lot less special to me, so it's your call here, Toby. I'm just here for the ride. Once we've checked everything out, Susie and Chris head off to the library to study for a group project, only to discover a similar sight as before with the school's supply closet, a dark and creepy shadow. Normal people would probably think there's a man in there trying to give you free candy, but Chris and Susie just barge straight in. Jumping into the eerie void of darkness meets the pair with a new dark world and all new enemies alike. I'll comment more on this in a bit, but the first taste of the enemy design we get here? Beautiful. Chris presses forward, and not long after entering the dark world, we find the villain of Chapter 2, and Noelle, I guess. Yeah, I kinda forgot to mention that she and Birdly went to study in the library, so they kinda fell into quite the weird predicament with Noelle being captured by the villain, Queen. Birdly is probably off in some back alley arcade doing some intense gaming, so we'll come back to him later. So Queen takes off, not before mocking the size of my brain. Ralsei is here, and the adventure begins. Hang on, wait just a freaking second there, pal. Back up. How did Ralsei even get here? He's kind of an enigma, so maybe some questions are better left unanswered, but I've got my eye on you, you shifty-looking goat. From here, we can dive into the gameplay since the plot slows down a bit to give us time to get used to the combat again, but first, a message from our sponsors at TheseEnemiesAreSoFreakingGood.com. Chapter 1's enemy designs were alright, but I did get kinda tired of seeing that one dude over and over again because I have him ingrained in my brain and I don't even remember its name. I think it was like Rudin or something, but I could not be asked to actually look it up because I'm too lazy. The designs weren't bad, just okay. I, however, would just like to extend my compliments to the chef for Chapter 2's enemies because they really did not have to go so hard on just the enemies but the characters in general because they all look great. A few of my personal favorites are the tasks, whatever the hell these things are, task managers, and no, not because I'm one of those freaks, and the werewires. They're such creative designs with really vibrant colors. I just love the palettes for them, and I felt like they stood out a lot more to me because they follow Chapter 2's theme of technology since it takes place in a computer room. Chapter 1 kind of did that, but it was more safe, I guess, since it was an unused classroom. I don't know, man. I look at any of the enemies in Chapter 1 and I cannot remember most of their names. Meanwhile, Chapter 2 has an incredible enemy lineup, just one after the other. The gameplay is obviously the same as before, still a ton of things to interact with and characters to talk to, enemies to spare. Oh, and speaking of, the combat is just as fun as ever. Like I said earlier, the addition of teammates proved to be a wonderful addition, not just for the story, dialogue, and all that, but also for combat. Undertale, as much as I like the game, it's repetitive as freaking heck to replay if you want to see everything in the game. Deltarune, on the other hand, I cannot explain it, but its combat has this special feeling to it, like not just taking Undertale's combat and performing the classic copy and paste, but adding so much more to it. In Undertale, you can slap people to death, talk them to death, or run away from your problems, but Deltarune takes a much deeper approach to the combat. Slapping people and acting are still viable options, however, we've got a bucket of new things here. To avoid confusion for the rest of the video, whenever I say acting or actions, I'm almost always going to be referring to the actions you can perform in battle, so hopefully that was absolutely not 100% confusing. Okay, yeah. Going into Chapter 2, you can control every character freely, no longer making Susie a mildly annoying character, because in every battle prior, you'd have to warn enemies about her attacking if you wanted to take the marginally different pacifist ending route. Also in Chapter 2, everyone can act on their own to raise the mercy meter. It's kind of a shame that the one unique quality of Chris's they had was taken away from them, but it makes Susie and Ralsei more versatile, so I don't really care all that much. RIP Chris. Chris can perform group actions which fill up the mercy meter much faster, but in return take up the turn of any party members involved. However, this isn't exclusive to Chris since Susie and Ralsei also have group actions they can perform when fighting certain enemies. Ralsei and Susie also have spells tied to their role in the team, like Susie has a Rude Buster which deals more damage, and Ralsei has the Heal Prayer, but I haven't found myself personally using Susie's Rude Buster, like, ever. I honestly forget it's even there most of the time since you can easily get along without it. Ralsei's Heal Prayer, however, has a very obvious amount of uses in the secret bosses, which I'll talk a bit about later, although if you continue from a Chapter 1 save file where you have a lot of items, you can keep them in Chapter 2, and both Chapter 1 and 2 aren't the most difficult games out there, so more often than not, I don't find myself needing healing that much. Whenever I did though, that's when I go to Ralsei. The last thing I want to say about combat for now is that yes, enemy bullet patterns are still really good. I want the creativity that Toby Fox and his team has when coming up with new bullet patterns. Like, how do they do it? The enemies that just provide support patterns go really well with the enemies they're paired with too. It just continues to make the combat surprisingly engaging. Overall with the combat, it's not difficult at all to tell that Toby has massively improved upon it from Undertale. With Undertale, I wouldn't say it was an afterthought, not at all actually, but the story was definitely more fleshed out and how interesting and engaging it was, since that was the primary focus, obviously. That's not all it improved upon though, as the story in Deltarune Chapter 2 takes a turn for the better and opens the door for, well, quite a bit actually. Like I said earlier, when I started playing Chapter 2, I was super skeptical on what it would be like and if it'd be even a satisfying continuation after about 2 years since the first. However, it not only provides a fun new setting with a lot of charming new characters and an especially quirky villain, but also in introducing more main characters to the Dark World, thus creating some new tension. Berdly and Noelle to be exact. As I mentioned, they went to study at the library and as a result fell into the computer room's Dark World, so what's up with them? So for context, Berdly and Noelle are friends and the two people you have a run-in with in Chapter 1. Chris knows Noelle as their childhood friend, and Berdly, he's an egotist, a nerd, and a gamer. Talk about a full package! At the beginning of Chapter 2, Noelle is taken by Queen to become her unwilling servant, and Berdly is off doing Berdly things, like immediately betraying all sense of logic and joining Queen's quest for world dominance. Chapter 2 kind of shifts the main focus from the fun gang to Berdly and Noelle, how they react to this new and bizarre scenario, and what memories it brings back. This is yet another thing to go on top of the pile of things that Chapter 2 does so dang well: world building. Unfortunately, this means we see a bit less of Ralsei and Susie, but I think it works really well to shake things up and give us some more time to get to know these other characters. Not to say I wouldn't have wanted Susie to be here so that she could give her sarcastic quips, but I think it's just nice to have some more slow-paced moments to break up the chaos. Like, there's a bit around the midpoint of the chapter where Chris and Noelle are just casually walking through an alley, solving puzzles with ease, and along the way just chatting about life. Okay, well, it's more like Noelle telling Chris things because they're probably dead inside, but I think you get what I mean. And Noelle and Berdly are that kind of polar opposite duo, which works even more in the writing's favor and the humor too. Speaking of, Berdly also has a lot of ammo here to just be stupid as hell. I mean, Queen unwillingly lets him join her side and his antics are just ridiculous. Like, okay Berdly, would you mind telling me what is in a gamer's delight? If I had to guess, there's a 95% chance that a gallon of Mountain Dew was stuffed in there given the green tint that pie has. Or whatever it's supposed to be, I have no idea, it just looks disgusting. Oh, you probably wanted me to say something serious about him, didn't you? Berdly, man, I don't know, what do you want me to say about him? He's just a fun character. My only complaint with him would be, and I'm getting into spoiler territory here, be ready for a lot of that. Berdly has a plot twist in the last half of the chapter that feels a lot like a very specific cliche I saw in a movie once. So basically, Queen captures Chris, Susie, and Berdly, they escape their cages thanks to Lancer and his epic gamer dance moves, they then have to solve some puzzles to proceed, and Berdly is actually stupid because he can't even solve a simple light puzzle. Stupid idiot. Oh, and that's kind of just his character arc. He just becomes stupid. I'm not even joking. Susie starts teasing him because he can't figure out the puzzle, and this makes him break down and admit that he's not all that smart. A long time ago with a spelling bee far, far away, he kept going further and further until it came down to him and Noelle, and they kept the pace going until eventually Noelle's nerves got the best of her and Birdly ends up winning, getting his first taste of that sweet, sweet attention pie. After that, Birdly strived for more of the happy hormone, but on his own he can't do that very well because he's stupid, and this is where Noelle comes in. She keeps him organized, studies with him, basically she is the driving force and why he's able to be such a nerd. I probably made it sound like I think this bit of character development for him to come to terms with the fact that he's not that smart was kind of stupid and bad, but honestly it isn't. It just kind of feels like a dollar store character arc compared to everyone else so far. It is kind of funny that Birdly gets the short end of the stick though, I'll admit, but at the same time Birdly actually becomes helpful to the fun gang for once after this, so maybe he's not all that bad. I might have to deduct a few points though because Birdly gives me the vibes of a Danganronpa fan. But what about the villain? I don't think I've said anything about her up until this point, and you know, she's kinda dumb too. Dumb and dumber. Queen is kinda just King 2.0 except she's not crazy evil or anything, just a silly antagonist, so I guess she's not really King 2.0, but you probably understand what I mean. I think the worst thing she does in the entire chapter, and you're not gonna believe this, I think it's an even worse plot twist than Birdly's. She's a mobile gamer! Mobile gamers aren't real gamers! Not much else to say about her though, honestly she's just a good character for everyone to bounce off of, and you get a lot of funny scenarios with her that you wouldn't see with the king since he only shows up at the end of the chapter 1. So yeah, the new characters are pretty cool. I kinda wish we got a bit more of that fun gang randomness from chapter 1, but I feel like it's balanced out pretty well otherwise. Like, the writing is still top tier stuff. This is one of the few games I've actually been able to finish chapters of it in one sitting because of how engaging and fun the characters and writing and humor all is. Just all of it. I know I've said fun a lot in this video, but I really do mean it. People love to dog on these quirky, Earthbound inspired RPGs when in reality there are like 4 of them and all of them are actually pretty good, and Deltarune is 100% not an exception to that. Toby Fox has just been improving upon all facets in game development, especially the music. So many banger songs here. One that stuck out to me in particular was the cyber battle theme where you're fighting sweet Cap'n Cakes, trying to get them to dance, that is. Afterwards, this plays. Whenever this started playing, I just knew immediately that I was going to love Chapter 2, and boy did I love the hell out of it. There's a bunch of other ones like A Cyber's World that also stuck out to me, but I have no idea how to talk about music, so I just don't feel like saying anything else. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, and let's not forget the bosses. I don't have a lot to say here, though something I appreciate more after finally playing through Undertale myself is how the bosses always have these slight exposition dumps that last just enough time for you to be able to beat them. Some of these guys give us a lot more to think about than others, but this is just one of those little things that I really appreciate about Deltarune and Undertale. Like, especially Spamton, like, look at this little goblin, what even is he? Anyway, I think I've covered the vast majority of things I want to talk about in this chapter so far, so let's talk about the ending and then we can dive even further into the absolute rabbit hole. I'll be delving into a lot of obvious spoiler territory, so if you're not into that, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. Otherwise, let's get into it. After Birdly's little confessionary, the gang splits up for a bit so Susie and Birdly can save Noelle, then they regroup, beat the snot out of Queen, then she grows like 50 feet, but do I even have to say it? With the power of anime transformations on their side, they form the ultimate robot fighting machine to box Queen to death. At least until her battery runs out. Afterwards, everyone decides that the Dark World might not be so bad after all. I mean, the adventure was surely unlike anything else any of them had ever seen with the magic, the monsters, and the new friends alike. This whole time, Queen wanted Noelle to be her servant because any lightener can create a dark fountain, that is if they can focus their will into their weapon. Queen wants her and her people people to be free from the confines of the library, so her solution is pretty obvious: create more dark fountains and subsequently bring about more freedom for her people. Most of the gang was against the idea up until this point, but after the new experiences, they want to open up a new fountain in the dark world, and then Wyrlwind drops a big fat truth bomb. Educating the group, Wyrlwind tells them all that creating more dark fountains is dangerous because once there's too many dark fountains, beings known as the Roaring Titans will envelop the world in pure devastation, leaving the Darkeners turned to statues and the Lighteners to fend for themselves in an endless darkness. Thanks for ruining the moment, Wyrlwind, like, screw you! So Queen quickly backs down and befriends the group because even she didn't want to see the world burn. Then everyone goes home and dies! Okay, not really though. Noelle and Birdly kinda go back to how they were before, because when Susie was talking to Noelle while rescuing her, she convinces her that this dark world stuff is actually just a dream, which is pretty lame because now Birdly is a nerd again. Boys go to Mars to get candy bars, girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider, and nerds have a special place in hell. After that, you can go back to the castle town if you want to talk to the queen or any of your other new recruits from Cyber City, but heading back home sees Chris and Susie end up having a sleepover. Toriel teaches Susie how to make a pie, Chris uses the bathroom, rips out his soul again, slashes some tires, and later that night he kinda sorta creates a dark fountain in his living room. What? Excuse me, hang on, slow down just a second there, pal, what? So, where do I even start with that? Chris turns out to presumably and not only be the one who created a dark fountain in the abandoned classroom, but also he's apparently the knight referenced by the king and queen. I have so many questions, first one being why? There are so many theories to be made about this, and I am not the guy to do it, at least not right now, because there's so much to unpack here, like a ton of stuff I haven't even mentioned yet, but I feel like this review would become a whole lot longer if I tried to cover all of it. I have honestly spent hours playing this game, reading theory posts, and slowly trying to piece together at least a little bit of what's going on, but unfortunately, as much as I'd like to share more of that here, it doesn't all fit well into a video that is mainly supposed to be a review, so instead I'm gonna move all of that content into another potential video I might upload sometime, hopefully soon, but we'll see. Before we conclude though, there's one last thing I'd like to discuss that does pertain to the lore and theory stuff. We can trail off into the separate discussions in that later video. So there seems to be this running theme in Deltarune that your choices don't matter. It's shoved down your throat at every given opportunity. The mystery man at the beginning tells you can't choose who you are, Susie reiterates that not too long after, and there's a few more points in not only Chapter 1, but Chapter 2 where you're given choices for Susie and she ends up doing her own thing anyway. There are some things you have control over though, like the ending you get, sort of. Chapter 1 has two different endings, a good ending and a not as good ending, but really the only difference is if you spare every enemy you can talk to them at the end of the chapter. In Chapter 2, however, you do get to see some consequence for your actions if you choose not to recruit any enemies. See, sparing enemies is more important because if you don't spare them then they aren't recruited, and if they aren't recruited they don't come back to the castle town, and everything is just empty. Even then, it remains to be seen if sparing or losing recruits will actually have any effect on the events going forward, but judging by the fact that there are no other routes currently, I'm not sure. I think you know where I'm going with this. Actually, there is another route in Chapter 2, and I'm sure you all know of it, so let's talk about it. Whether or not you spend your time losing or sparing enemies throughout a normal playthrough, it ultimately won't matter. The running theory here is that this is because you play the role of one of the three heroes mentioned in the prophecy. Wyrlwind even mentions in Chapter 1 that once you head through the door to the unused classroom dark world, their adventure, foretold exactly by the prophecy, will begin. However, he does backpedal and say that he believes Chris's choices matter too, which they seemingly really don't. At least not so far. But where am I going with this? Well, this is where Noelle in Chapter 2 enters. If you avoid all enemies up until the point where Noelle joins Chris, then begin to backtrack to a specific door, you'll have started what's known as the Snowgrave route. Now why is it known as this? Put simply, Noelle has a spell called Ice Shock. If you choose for Chris to block attacks and build up TP to constantly use Ice Shock, you can freeze enemies, effectively killing them. This is something we couldn't do on our own, because if we beat enemies normally, then they just run away before dying. As we continue down this route, it progressively gets more twisted and eerie all around, corrupting Noelle's mind further and further. There's a point where you can see it starting to really affect her. Once you get to the part of Cyber City with the Ferris wheel advertisement, you basically have to act like an absolute creep. Noelle wonders if Susie would want to ride the Ferris wheel at the festival with her, so in response, you incessantly suggest that you could ride with her. After this, if you talk to the Addison, he thinks Noelle and Chris are a couple. If you say we're something more and then leave, he offers to sell you a freeze ring, which you can only barely not afford. After some relatively normal negotiation, Noelle freezes him and takes the ring. This is how normal people talk to each other, right? From here, you'll start to notice a change in her behavior. She begins to question what she's doing and if it's really the right thing. Continuing to freeze more and more enemies, things are expectedly different as you proceed. Cars are gone, enemies begin running away from you, and puzzles are solved in a similar way as with everything else. This all builds up to and culminates with one battle. The rest of what happens here isn't really important, but there is some extra dialogue that plays if you visit the hospital after sealing the fountain. I'll save you most of the details, but the idea it's trying to get across is that Chris isn't the one doing this. It's you, the player. And you're acting through Chris to use Noelle to change fate, and no one else even knows it yet. This route is scarily good at its most unnerving moments. I feel like it's achieved this much better than Undertale's Genocide route did, because by the end of this you genuinely feel bad for messing up Noelle's psyche, unless you enjoyed doing that, in which case you're a freak. Even if Susie told her it was a dream, you can still choose to torment her with one simple dialogue option. The real scary thing is that it's likely no one will know Berdly is dead, at least not until chapters much later on presumably, because after you seal the fountain, you're back in the computer room and everyone leaves you with Berdly's corpse. No one else knows he's dead except for you and Noelle, who's still questioning her sanity, and if you interact with the room, you can see the closet, which has a particular line of dialogue saying, "A large person could easily fit in here." I wonder why it says that. And, well, that's just about everything in Chapter 2 that I wanted to discuss. There's still a lot more I could delve into for that potential future lore questions and theory video, so let me know if you have anything in particular you'd want me to talk about in it, and I'd really love to hear your suggestions. Chapter 2 was genuinely incredibly fun, honestly a 10 out of 10 for me. You might think that's overselling it, but there's so many things in Chapter 2 that it does so incredibly well, like the music, the writing, character design, combat, bosses. It's all incredible to me. All of this stuff kind of combines and melds to make Deltarune this really special experience for me so far, and I can only hope that Deltarune Chapters 3 through 5 and then 6 and 7 just continue this trend, because, man, I love Chapter 2. From here, I'm unsure if I want to review individual chapters of Deltarune or if I'll wait for the full game to come out then review it as a whole, but regardless, thank you so much if you watched all the way through. I know I'm really late with this video, I know. I just have a lot of thoughts I want to get off my chest. That said, consider liking the video, subscribing, all that good stuff if you enjoyed the video, It's Wyrlwind, and have a great day.